All right, this week we've got assignment 6.2. Let me just change that real quick. And it's 6 problems. For the first problem, what I did was, first off, I wrote my select statement, pulling from the vendors table. I wanted distinct vendor names for this problem, but I wanted it so that we got the vendor IDs that were also in the invoices table for the purpose that we were using them for. And this is, excuse me, the subquery that I wrote, and I ordered them by vendor name. For the second exercise, I asked to pull from the invoices table for both my overall query and my subquery. And I pulled two columns, the invoice number and the aggregate function for max payment total as the invoice total. And I said I wanted it where the invoice total was greater than the average payment total in the subquery. And as usual for aggregate functions, had to group it by whatever was not in the aggregate function or the invoice number. And I ordered it by invoice number and then invoice total. And before I forget, run this one. This is what my results were for that one. Had 34 rows and 24 rows for the second one. Skip problem 3, move on to problem 4 because we didn't do problem 3. So for problem 4, I wanted two columns, the account number and the account description. I pulled from the GL accounts, my bad. And I wanted to say where the account numbers and descriptions do not exist in the subquery of the invoice archives ordered by the account number. If we execute that, we get 75 rows. Exercise 5, I asked for 4 columns and I used 2 inner joins. First one being vendors to invoices table in the overall query, and then I use another invoice or another inner join to join these two tables with the invoice line items, all on IDs. And for the subquery, I asked where the invoice sequence is greater than the average invoice sequence in invoice line items. So running that one, we get 4 rows, 4 columns. And then the final exercise, we were supposed to have one value that summed up the total invoices not sent, I believe. So I asked for the top one invoice ID, and the top one invoice total as max total. I pulled from the invoices table, but I joined it with a subquery that pulled from the invoices table as well. And in the subquery, I grouped the invoice or the vendor ID because the aggregate function of max within the invoice total, you have to group the stuff that's not in the aggregate function uh, together. And I ordered them by descending order. And because this was a join query, I had to label this subquery as top vendor. That's what we were supposed to label it as. And I grouped it by invoices ID again because of the aggregate function. And then I ordered it by the max total. And when we run it, we get one value. So yes, that is my 6.2 homework.